You'll never be anything, not with that kid and that piece of junk car. That's what my brother said as he leaned against his brand new truck, arms folded, grinning at me like I was a punchline in some private joke. We were standing in our parents' driveway, and I had just dropped off a few groceries. Not that they asked for any. I was just trying to help. My car, a dented, dusty Corolla that coughed like it had asthma, was parked next to his spotless F-150. He kept glancing at it like it offended him just by existing. "Don't you feel embarrassed?" he said, loud enough for the neighbor to hear. "Rolling up in that? I wouldn't even drive that to a junkyard." I looked at my son, Leo, sitting quietly in the back seat, kicking his feet. He was only 3, but he looked up at me, eyes wide, sensing something was off. Kids know, even when they don't understand, they feel everything. I forced a smile, trying to hide the sting. It gets me where I need to go. Dylan scoffed. Yeah, to nowhere. I didn't say anything. I just got in the car. As I turned the key and the engine whined to life like it was begging for mercy, I heard him laugh behind me. Not just a laugh, a full belly laugh, like he'd told the world's funniest joke. Except the joke was me. I wanted to scream, or cry, or both. But Leo was watching, so I drove off, hands trembling on the wheel, blinking away the tears that threatened to fall. Not because of the car, not even because of the insult, but because the person who said it used to be my best friend. My name is Tessa Monroe. I'm 31 now, but at 26, I felt like my life had already ended. I used to think I had it all figured out. I married young. Too young, if I'm being honest, to a man who made big promises and broke them just as easily. Evan was charming at first. He knew how to make you feel special, important, wanted. But all of that changed within a year of saying, "I do." The affection turned into indifference, and eventually into bruises I couldn't explain away anymore. Emotional at first, then physical. When I found out I was pregnant, I knew I couldn't stay. Not for me. I would have found a way to justify staying like I always had. But for the baby growing inside me, I didn't want my child to grow up in a home where love came with fear. So at 7 months pregnant, I packed 2 suitcases, emptied the tiny savings I had left, and took a bus back to my hometown. I thought my family would be relieved. I thought they'd wrap me in their arms and tell me I'd done the right thing. But things don't always go the way you hope. My parents let me stay, reluctantly. I moved into the small guest room with peeling wallpaper and no closet. My dad mostly stayed quiet. He never liked confrontation. My mom, though, she was cold in that quiet, cutting way that made you feel ashamed without saying much at all. She made it clear I was a guest in my own childhood home. And then there was Dylan, my older brother, my childhood protector. When we were little, he used to defend me on the playground. If anyone made fun of me, he'd be the first one to jump in. We were best friends growing up, chasing each other through the woods behind our house, sharing secrets, sneaking cookies late at night. I thought if anyone would understand, if anyone would have my back, it'd be him. But something had changed, or maybe I had. From the moment I stepped back into the house, belly swollen, he looked at me differently, like I was weak, like I had failed at life. He just landed a cushy job at a marketing firm, driving a new truck and walking around like he had Wall Street on speed dial. He never said it outright at first, but his eyes said enough. I was a burden, a mistake, embarrassment. One night, a week after I moved in, I overheard him talking to our mom in the kitchen. I was supposed to be asleep, but insomnia and anxiety had other plans. "She's going to live here with a baby? Seriously?" "She doesn't have anywhere else to go, Dylan," my mom whispered. "She made her bed," he snapped. "Let her lie in it." Those words didn't just sting. They tore open something in me. I had risked everything to give my son a better life. I thought coming home meant safety. Instead, it felt like I'd entered a courtroom where I was the defendant and everyone else was the jury. After Leo was born, things didn't get easier. I got used to the sideways glances, the sighs when I asked for help watching him so I could go to a job interview, The passive-aggressive comments about how I should have thought things through before getting knocked up. Dylan never missed a chance to make a snide remark, especially when others were around. He told me once during a particularly tense dinner, "You had so much potential in high school. Now you're just surviving." Surviving? That's what they thought I was doing, scraping by, taking up space. But what they didn't see, and what Dylan never bothered to ask, was that I was still fighting every single day for Leo, for myself, for a future no one else could imagine, but I refused to give up on. That's why what he said in the driveway, the way he laughed at my car, mocked my life, hurt deeper than just a mean comment. It hurt because it came from someone who used to protect me, because it confirmed what I had feared for so long. They didn't believe in me, not even a little. And in that moment, I silently made a promise. One day they'd see exactly who I was becoming, and they'd regret ever thinking I was less. After Leo was born, everything changed, and not in the magical, heartwarming way people write about in parenting books. It wasn't midnight lullabies and baby giggles. It was 2 a.m. feedings with no sleep, job rejections piling up in my inbox, and pretending I didn't hear the disappointment in my mother's voice every time I asked to borrow the car. My family saw me as broken, a charity case, a mistake that kept needing more fixing. Dylan was the worst of all. He'd always walk into a room like he owned the air, flashing his latest gadget or talking loudly on speakerphone about his networking dinners. It didn't matter that I was sleep-deprived or that Leo had just thrown up on me. He'd make a show of glancing at my stained clothes or my undone hair like I'd failed some unspoken test. "Rough night, huh?" he'd say with that fake sympathy. "I can't even imagine." He never tried to imagine. No one ever asked how I was doing, or how Leo was adjusting, or if I needed anything. I got polite nods and closed doors. I had to remind my mom multiple times to turn down the TV when Leo was napping. She'd always sigh and say, "You'll need to toughen him up anyway." It wasn't just their words, it was the silence. The way the dinner conversations would go on around me, never to me. The way my dad would pass the mashed potatoes across the table without making eye contact. The way Dylan would talk about his weekend plans in front of me like I didn't exist. And the thing was, I got it. I really did. I didn't have a career. I didn't have a husband. I wasn't going to brunch or traveling or going out on Saturday nights. I was 27, living in my parents' guest room with an infant, trying to make formula stretch until payday. I knew what they saw. A failure. A single mom with no ambition. A girl who had potential once and wasted it on the wrong guy. But what they didn't see, couldn't see, was that I was still in the ring. Every morning I got up before sunrise, fed Leo, bathed him, dressed him, applied to jobs while he napped on my chest, walked to interviews because I couldn't afford gas, rejected again and again, but I still showed up the next day. I volunteered for night shifts at a nearby diner just to keep cash coming in. On weekends, I taught myself Excel and bookkeeping online for free. I watched videos while rocking Leo to sleep. I studied while folding laundry. I wrote cover letters in the middle of the night, whispering my dreams out loud while the rest of the house was silent. No one clapped for me. No one said, "I'm proud of you." But I kept going. Because Leo's giggle at 6 in the morning was worth more than Dylan's approval. Because every time he said, "Mama," I remembered who I was fighting for. I remember one day, Leo had just turned 1. I was walking home from the store, bags in both hands, Leo strapped to my chest in a carrier. My back ached, and I was sweating through my shirt. As I turned the corner onto our street, Dylan drove past me in his truck, windows down, music blasting. He looked right at me and kept driving. Didn't even slow down. I stood there on the sidewalk, arms burning, heart heavier than the groceries, and in that moment I stopped expecting help. I stopped waiting for someone to lift me up. I realized no one was coming. If I wanted a better life, I'd have to build it myself, brick by brick, day by day, failure after failure. And even though I didn't feel strong, even though I cried in the shower and doubted myself constantly, deep down I knew one thing. They had underestimated the wrong woman. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Leo had a fever. I remember the day so clearly because it was one of those moments where everything feels like it's teetering on the edge, where your life could tip either toward disaster or breakthrough. I was late picking up his prescription because the bus broke down. By the time I got home, my mom was in one of her moods. "You can't keep relying on us like this, Tessa," she said, arms crossed in the hallway, the medicine bag still dangling from my hand. "This isn't a daycare. We're tired too." I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded and went into my room. I didn't expect anything from anyone anymore, especially not from Dylan. So when he knocked on my door later that night, I didn't even look up. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, rocking Leo back and forth, a wet washcloth on his forehead. I figured he just needed something from the guest room closet or wanted to tell me to keep the baby quiet. But his voice surprised me. "Hey," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "You free tomorrow morning?" I blinked. "Why?" "There's this interview downtown, my buddy's company. They're hiring for a receptionist/admin assistant. Not a bad gig. I figured maybe you'd want to ride." I stared at him for a second, trying to gauge the sarcasm I was used to. But his face was neutral, maybe even a little thoughtful. You want to drive me?" I asked, genuinely confused. He shrugged. "Yeah, why not?" It was such a simple gesture. So ordinary. But to me, it felt monumental. Like maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see I was trying. Maybe he realized I wasn't the loser he thought I was. Maybe helping Leo that week, seeing how tired I was, softened something in him. I hesitated, but then nodded. "Sure. Thanks." That night, I actually let myself feel hope for the first time in weeks. I even let myself believe the tide might be turning. I stayed up planning answers to common interview questions and ironing the one blouse I had that didn't look like it had survived a hurricane. At 9 a.m. the next morning, I waited out front with my resume tucked into a used folder, holding Leo on my hip and watching Dylan's truck pull into the driveway. He didn't say much during the ride, just tapped his fingers on the steering wheel to the beat of some podcast about cryptocurrency. But there wasn't any mocking, no side eyes, no passive-aggressive jokes. At one point, I dared to say, "Thanks again, Dylan. It really helps." He just nodded. "No problem." It was quiet after that, but peaceful. For a moment, I felt like we were kids again, back before everything got messy and complicated, before I became the mistake. He pulled up to the building and looked at me. "You got this," he said, almost like he meant it. That one sentence lit something inside me. My heart swelled. I actually smiled. "Thanks," I whispered, and stepped out with shaking hands and too many emotions. I didn't land that job. They wanted someone with 3 years of experience, and my childcare gaps were a red flag for them. But weirdly, I wasn't crushed, because for the first time in years, I had felt seen, not just tolerated, not just criticized. I felt like maybe I mattered again. That night at dinner, I even offered to wash the dishes, and Dylan said, "Wow, look at you, all grown up and everything." It was meant as a joke, but it didn't sting, not like before. But that moment of peace, of hope, of thinking maybe he was on my side, it didn't last, and the next time Dylan opened his mouth, it shattered everything I thought had changed. I should have known better than to believe it. That ride to the interview, Dylan's neutral tone, the "you got this" comment, it had felt so real, so sincere. For the first time in years, I thought maybe he saw me. Maybe my brother was finally seeing past the broken pieces and recognizing the woman rebuilding herself. I was wrong. It happened the following Sunday. Dinner at my parents' house had become a tradition again, mostly because I didn't have anywhere else to be. We all sat around the old oak table, the same one we used to eat at when we were kids. Back then, it was filled with laughter and bickering over who got the last dinner roll. Now it felt more like a stage, and I was always playing the role of the pitiful understudy. That evening, Dylan was in an especially good mood. He'd just been given a new client at work and was gloating about how they flew him business class to Boston. Perks of not having a screaming toddler, he said with a grin, looking directly at me. I brushed it off. I'd gotten good at brushing it off, but it still felt like a pebble in my shoe, small but relentless. Then he leaned back in his chair, fork still in hand, and looked around like he had the juiciest story to tell. "Oh, you guys will love this," he said. "So earlier this week, I gave Tessa a ride to an interview, some receptionist job or something." I froze. My hand, mid-reach for Leo's sippy cup, just stopped. My dad raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? How'd that go?" Dylan smirked. "I don't know, we didn't really talk about it after, but I swear she had her resume in one of those dollar store folders. It was like a scene from one of those reality shows where they give people a makeover." I felt the blood drain from my face. My mom chuckled softly, like it was nothing. "Well, at least she's trying," she said. Dylan wasn't finished. "I'm serious. She looked so nervous I thought she was going to pass out. I told her, just smile and don't talk too much. You might have a chance." He laughed at his own joke. The room erupted in snickers. Even my father cracked a smile. I looked at Leo, sitting beside me with mashed potatoes on his cheek. He didn't understand the words, but he was watching the room, watching me. Something inside me cracked. "I actually didn't get that job," I said, trying to sound steady. Dylan shrugged. "No big shock. Those places want experience, not just desperation." The room quieted a bit, sensing the shift in tone. I pushed my chair back slowly and stood up. "Thanks for the ride, Dylan," I said softly, "and for the encouragement." He blinked. "I was just kidding." "I know," I said. "That's the funny part." I picked up Leo and left my plate half finished. Walked out of that house like I wasn't welcome, even though I technically lived there. The air outside felt cold, or maybe it was just me shaking. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, with Leo asleep on my chest and a storm in my chest. I kept replaying his words, his smug face, the laughter. How quickly they all joined in, how natural it seemed for them to find amusement in my struggle. I had hoped too soon, trusted too quickly. Dylan hadn't changed. None of them had. That moment in the car wasn't a turning point. It was a setup for another punchline. I was still the family's cautionary tale, their what not to do story. But as I looked at my son sleeping peacefully against me, something hardened in me. I wiped away the last tear I would ever shed over their approval. I didn't need their encouragement. I didn't need their laughter to stop. I just needed to build a life that left them speechless, and I would. That night, after the dinner humiliation, I didn't cry right away. I sat on the floor of my room for what felt like hours, holding Leo as he slept, staring at the wall like it might offer answers. My ears were still ringing from the laughter, and Dylan's voice kept echoing in my head. "Just don't talk too much. You might have a chance." I had smiled through worse before. I'd held my breath through cruel comments, ignored stares, excused silence. But this was different. This time, I had believed him. That flicker of hope I'd carried, so fragile, so rare, it had been snuffed out. Not by a stranger, not by some interviewer or online rejection email, but by my own brother. And they'd all watched it happen. They'd laughed like it was entertainment. That's what hurt most. I wasn't just dismissed. I was mocked. To them, my effort was comedy. I waited until Leo was sound asleep and the house was dark. Then I went into the bathroom, closed the door, turned the faucet on, and let the sobs come. I didn't cry quietly. I tried at first, but the pain was too loud. It clawed its way out of me, and I collapsed against the cool tile, shaking with the weight of years of silence. I cried for the girl who thought family would be her shelter. I cried for the mother who had to be strong every day, but wasn't strong enough to stop hurting. I cried because I felt invisible. And when I had nothing left, I stared at my reflection. Puffy eyes, blotchy skin, tired, so tired. But then something shifted. Because as broken as I looked, I was still standing, still breathing, still here. They hadn't broken me. Not really. They'd buried me in shame. Sure. But maybe, just maybe, they didn't realize I was a seed. The next morning, no one asked if I was okay. My mother passed me the cereal box without a glance. My dad didn't look up from his paper. Dylan wasn't there. Probably off to brunch or wherever people without responsibilities went. I got Leo ready, brushed his curls, packed his snacks, dressed him in his favorite yellow shirt. He smiled at me with that toothy toddler grin and said, "Mommy, you're happy." It stopped me in my tracks. I crouched down, kissed his forehead, and said, "I will be, baby." I promised that was the moment something inside me clicked. I realized I had spent too much time proving myself to people who were never going to see me clearly. People who had already written the story of my life and handed me the role of failure. And every time I tried to show them I was more than that, they just turned the page back. So I stopped trying. I didn't slam doors or scream or make declarations. I just stopped depending on them, emotionally, mentally. I stopped needing their validation, like oxygen. In that space, something new began to grow, quietly, slowly. Inside the cracks they left behind, I started waking up before Leo to read business blogs and watch tutorials on project management. I downloaded every free PDF, signed up for webinars, listened to podcasts while doing laundry. I didn't have a career yet, but I could build the skills, one piece at a time. When I wasn't applying for jobs, I was building myself. No one knew. They still saw the same girl in sweatpants with a toddler on her hip. Still assumed I was lost. They had no idea I was building a map. The isolation was real, painful. Some days it felt unbearable. But it also gave me space to hear my own voice, something I'd forgotten the sound of. I wasn't just recovering, I was rebuilding. And from that moment forward, I decided I would become the woman no one saw coming. It happened on a Monday morning. Leo had just gone down for his nap, and I was in the kitchen cleaning up, still thinking about the dozens of job applications I'd sent the week before. Most had gone unanswered. The rest were polite rejections. "We've decided to move forward with another candidate," they said, as if those words didn't slowly chip away at someone's sense of worth. I was scrubbing an old sippy cup when my phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. I hesitated. For some reason, I answered. "Is this Tessa Monroe?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "Tessa, it's Aunt Rena, your mom's sister." I paused, caught off guard. I hadn't heard from Rena in nearly 5 years. She'd moved to the West Coast, started some kind of tech company, or maybe a software business, I couldn't remember. I only knew that her name was rarely spoken in our house, usually followed by a sigh or an eye roll from my mother. "Oh, hi," I said, still unsure why she was calling. "I saw your LinkedIn post," she said warmly. "The one about rebuilding your life. I liked what you wrote. Honest. Director. You always were a good writer." I blinked. "You're on LinkedIn?" She laughed. "Yes, Tessa. I'm not 90. We both chuckled, and something about hearing my own laughter again felt strange, like finding a favorite old sweater you thought you'd lost. She continued, "I didn't know things had gotten so tough for you. I'm sorry for that." There was a pause. I could have brushed it off, made a joke, changed the subject. But I didn't. I let the silence sit. "Thanks," I said quietly. "I've been looking for someone to help run the operations side of a new branch," she said. "We're expanding to the East Coast. It's not glamorous at first. It's spreadsheets, client follow-ups, coordinating remote teams. But it's real work, real pay, real growth." My heart started racing. "I don't have a degree," I said. "Not in business or anything, and I've been out of the game for a while." "Tessa," she said gently, "I'm not calling because of your resume. I'm calling because of your grit. You're teachable. You work hard. I don't care what anyone else sees. I see you." That last line nearly broke me. I'd like to offer you a chance, she continued. Part-time to start, flexible hours so you can be with Leo. I'll mentor you myself. We'll figure it out together. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, but this time, they weren't from sadness. They were from something else, something that felt like hope. Why are you doing this? I asked. Why me? She didn't hesitate, because someone did it for me once, and because I know what it's like to be underestimated. We spoke for another hour. She explained the role, the expectations, the long nights, the steep learning curve. She didn't sugarcoat anything, and I appreciated that more than she knew. When I hung up, I stood in the middle of the kitchen for a long time, hands trembling, heart pounding. I had a lifeline, a real one. And not from a stranger, from family, from someone who believed in second chances, someone who didn't see me as a mistake or a single mom or a burden, just me. When Leo woke up from his nap, I scooped him into my arms, twirled him in a circle, and said, "Mama got a job today." He clapped, not really understanding, but laughing anyway. And in that moment, the weight I'd been carrying for so long finally felt just a little lighter. That night, I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents, not Dylan. I wanted to keep it mine for now. Pure. Untouched. It wasn't just a job. It was the beginning of a new chapter, and the first time in a long time I felt like the story might finally be mine to write. I didn't quit being invisible. I just learned to use it. For months, no one in my family knew I was working again. They saw me doing what I always did. Cooking, cleaning, feeding Leo, walking to the store. But what they didn't see were the hours in between. The hours I was building something they couldn't even imagine. Every morning I woke up at 5:30 while the house was still dark. I'd pull on my sweater, open my old laptop, and meet with Aunt Rena over Zoom. She taught me everything: how to use project management tools, how to schedule remote teams across time zones, how to read basic financials. She was patient, but she didn't coddle me, and I didn't want her to. She gave me real work. I started small, answering emails, updating spreadsheets, organizing client files. Then came more responsibility, onboarding new hires, running weekly meetings, creating process documents. And every time I doubted myself, she reminded me, you don't have to know everything. You just have to learn faster than the problem. I learned to multitask like my life depended on it, because it did. While Leo napped, I filed contracts. When he played with blocks, I took calls with vendors. I fed him dinner while watching tutorial videos on data analysis. When he was asleep at night, I worked until my eyes burned. There were no congratulatory texts, no support from the people in the next room. My parents still thought I was job hunting. Dylan hadn't said more than a handful of words to me since the dinner incident, but I didn't care. In fact, their silence became my fuel. I was tired of being someone they felt sorry for. Tired of the smug looks, the judgment, the way Dylan puffed his chest every time he talked about real careers. He didn't know I was logging more hours than him, managing more people, taking on more risk, and succeeding. And success didn't come all at once. It came like a tide, slowly, consistently, pulling me forward. 3 months in, Rena sent me a message. Your workflow document was a hit. The investors want to meet the person behind it. I stared at that sentence, frozen. Then slowly, I smiled. The first real proud smile I'd felt in years. So 4 months in, she asked me to train a new hire. 6 months in, I was promoted to operations manager for the East Coast branch. Remote, full-time, with benefits. That night, I opened a savings account. For the first time since Leo was born, I had more than $100 in my name. I transferred $50 into a secret little fund and named it Our Future. No one clapped, no one noticed, but I noticed. My back stood straighter. My thoughts were sharper. I started speaking with more confidence even when I wasn't on work calls. And slowly, I saw the shift in Leo too. He'd mimic me typing on his toy laptop. He'd say things like, "Mama's working hard," and then giggle when I kissed his forehead. He didn't know it, but he was my why, my reason for never quitting, never slowing down, never letting the weight crush me. I stopped asking my parents for help. I stopped looking for approval. I even stopped waiting for Dylan to say something kind. I wasn't the girl in the guest room anymore. I was the woman building a future right under their roof. And it was only a matter of time before they realized how far I'd come. But I wasn't doing it for the recognition. I was doing it because I finally remembered who I was before the world tried to convince me I was nothing. A mother, a fighter, a builder, a leader. I didn't grow in the spotlight. I grew in the dark. And that made me unstoppable. Purpose of this section. This chapter shows the silent phase of transformation, the hard, unglamorous work behind the scenes. It highlights Tessa's discipline, resilience, and growing strength without external validation. Viewers will begin to feel the momentum of her comeback and anticipate the powerful reveal ahead. By the time I was promoted to Regional Operations Director, I was managing 3 teams across 2 time zones and working on a product launch with a 7-figure budget. But at home, my parents still thought I was watching YouTube job interview tips. They never asked questions, and I stopped offering answers. Why waste breath trying to explain a future to people who refuse to see beyond my past? The house still ran the same way. My mom still left passive-aggressive notes when I forgot to take out the trash. My dad still mumbled, "Don't work too hard," when he saw me on my laptop at night, like I was playing some endless game. And Dylan? Dylan was still Dylan, louder than ever. Now 31, he was growing increasingly restless. The company he worked for had scaled down, and while he didn't admit it out loud, I overheard him arguing on the phone in the garage more than once. Words like laid off, freelance, and temporary floated through the walls. But to the family, he was still the golden boy. He had a gym membership, a smartwatch, a car lease, and a girlfriend he talked about like a trophy. At dinner, he filled the silence with stories about clients and brand metrics, most of which sounded like recycled jargon from LinkedIn posts. I'd sit there quietly cutting Leo's food, letting Dylan talk himself into a corner of empty bragging. He never once asked how I was doing. One Sunday, while Leo played with his toy trucks on the floor, Dylan walked into the living room and dropped onto the couch with a loud sigh. "I swear," he said, "startups are a joke. The new place I applied to ghosted me after 2 interviews. Unprofessional, right?" I looked up, pretending to be surprised. "You're looking for a new job?" He shrugged. "Yeah, my current gig isn't what it used to be. I'm just keeping my options open, trying to level up. You know how it is." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know exactly how it is." He kept going, completely unaware. "I'm applying to a few leadership roles, ops manager stuff. My friend said the East Coast scene is heating up. Might even land something at a company called Solvex." I almost choked on my tea. Solvex was the name of my company, the very one Aunt Rena and I had built from the ground up, now in the middle of scaling nationally. The same company where I had just taken over hiring for all regional leadership roles. He kept talking. "They've got a position open in their remote division. I saw the posting. I sent in my resume last week. Should be a good fit for me." I wanted to laugh. I really did. But I just smiled politely. "Sounds promising," I said. "Yeah," he grinned. "They'd be lucky to have me." I nodded again, letting the moment soak in. He had no idea, not a single clue. He was applying to work for me. The same sister he laughed at for being a single mom with no future. The same one he mocked for needing rides to interviews and living in a fantasy of self-reinvention. And now he wanted to be part of the company I was helping run. The irony was delicious. But I didn't say a word, because the longer he underestimated me, the sweeter the reveal would be. In the following days, he kept bringing it up, dropping casual hints about how some companies look past experience and just see raw leadership, and how he crushed the written assessment. I even watched him rehearse for a potential Zoom interview in the mirror, straightening his collar and saying things like, "I bring value to any team I join." And through it all, I just kept doing my work, leading meetings, approving budgets, scheduling interviews, and building the empire he would soon beg to be a part of. They all still saw me as the girl with the crying baby and the crumbling resume. But I had stopped living in their version of me a long time ago. They thought I was still behind, but they were already too far back to see how far ahead I'd gone. It was a quiet Thursday when I saw the email. Subject line: Interview request. Dylan Monroe. I stared at it for a long time, blinking to make sure I wasn't imagining things. But there it was, clear, unmistakable, and kind of poetic. Dylan had officially applied to Solvex, my company. The one he thought was some flashy startup he'd easily impress. The one where I was now the regional director of operations. And the one where I personally oversaw all hiring decisions in our East Coast division. I leaned back in my chair, heart beating a little faster. Not out of revenge, not even out of anger, just disbelief. He had no idea. The resume was as inflated as his ego. Buzzwords, generic language, and a few roles he'd clearly exaggerated. I'd seen hundreds like it, but what stood out wasn't what was on the paper. It was the name. My brother. The same brother who'd humiliated me at dinner tables, laughed at my car, and told me I had no future. I clicked schedule without hesitation. I could have passed it to someone else, delegated it, let HR take the lead, but I didn't. I wanted this moment. Not out of spite, I was long past that, but because it was mine. A full circle moment I had earned through sweat, silence, and sheer determination. I scheduled the interview for the following Tuesday at 10 a.m. and sent him a standard confirmation email under my professional title. Tessa Monroe, Regional Director, Solvex Technologies. I figured he'd skim it, focus on the company name, maybe get nervous but never connect the dots. Dylan didn't pay attention to details. He paid attention to mirrors. The weekend before the interview, he mentioned it casually over dinner, like it was a favor he was granting the company. "I've got a pretty big interview Tuesday," he said, stabbing a fork into his pasta. "Tech firm, good salary, remote options. Might finally be able to work for a place that respects my experience." My mom perked up. "Oh? What's the name?" "Solvex," he said, chewing slowly. "Some East Coast branch. They're expanding." I sipped my water, saying nothing. My dad nodded, pretending to know what that meant. "That's great, son. You'll blow them away." "I know," Dylan said. "They'd be lucky to have me." I quietly wiped Leo's mouth and smiled to myself. On Monday night, I prepped the interview file like I would for any other candidate. I printed his resume, highlighted inconsistencies, and created a neutral set of questions. My professionalism didn't falter, even when my emotions threatened to. I wouldn't let them. This wasn't revenge, this was business. That morning, I dressed with intention. Sleek black blazer, hair pulled back, polished and calm. Leo was at preschool. My meeting room was ready, the camera was on. At 9:59 a.m., I clicked, join. At 10:01, Dylan appeared on the screen. He looked nervous. Suit jacket on, collar too tight, eyes shifting like he was still trying to memorize buzzwords. And then he saw me. His face didn't register it at first. His eyes darted to the name tag under my video feed, and then back to my face. And that's when it happened. His smile faltered. His shoulders dropped. And for the first time in a long time, he was speechless. But I wasn't. "Good morning, Dylan," I said, my voice steady. "I'm Tessa Monroe, and I'll be conducting your interview today." He blinked, twice. His lips parted like he might say something, but nothing came. And in that moment, I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to remind him of the driveway, the dinner table, the cruel comments, because the silence said everything. The table had turned, and the seat he once laughed at me for sitting in, I now owned it. Dylan stared at the screen like he was glitching. His eyes flicked from the corner where my name sat. Tessa Monroe, Regional Director, to my face. Then back again. For a full 10 seconds, he didn't say a word, And for once in my life, I didn't fill the silence for him. I watched him. He tried to recover, forced a half smile, then let out a breathy laugh. Wait, is this a joke? Are you seriously the interviewer? I leaned forward slightly, keeping my expression even. Yes, I said. I laid hiring for this division, and you applied to my company. Another pause. He blinked, still stunned. No way, I didn't know you work there. Not only do I work here, I said calmly, I helped build this branch from the ground up. I've overseen 3 product launches, led a regional expansion, and scaled our operations team to over 40 employees. I let that sink in. He didn't have a comeback this time. His confident posture had crumpled, and in its place was something I'd never seen on his face before when he looked at me: respect and fear. You're the director? He said finally, voice smaller now. I am. I let the silence stretch. Not to be dramatic, but to give the moment the gravity it deserved. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smile smugly. I didn't need to. My success didn't need decoration. I'm here today as your interviewer, I continued. This is a professional setting, and I expect professionalism from all candidates. He straightened his back like a schoolboy being scolded, muttering, "Right. Of course." So I started. I asked him the same structured questions I'd prepared for everyone else, about team dynamics, conflict resolution, long-term goals. He stumbled. He tried to sound impressive, but he wasn't used to being evaluated by someone who already knew the real him. And I wasn't playing the role of little sister anymore. I was the one in charge. Midway through, he said something that made me pause. I think I'd be a strong cultural fit, he offered, because I bring humility and a hunger to grow. Humility. From Dylan. I tilted my head slightly. That's interesting, I said. Humility is important. It's also something we look for in team players, especially those willing to learn from others, even if those others don't match their expectations. He flushed. He knew what I meant. We both did. I didn't bring up the past. I didn't need to remind him of the driveway, the dinner table, the way he mocked me while I was carrying groceries and carrying his nephew at the same time. I just finished the interview. Thank you for your time, I said, voice steady. You'll hear from our hiring team with a decision within the week. He opened his mouth to speak. I saw the flicker of apology forming in his expression, but I ended the call before he could say a word. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. That wasn't the time for closure. That was the time for power. I sat there for a moment afterward, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. I didn't feel victorious in a loud, dramatic way. I didn't feel giddy or spiteful. I just felt full. Not full of revenge, not full of rage, full of myself. In a way I hadn't felt since before the shame, the struggle, the silence. It wasn't about putting Dylan in his place. It was about finally standing in mine, in control, respected, seen, and most importantly, unshakable. For years, I'd chased his approval, waited for my family to acknowledge my worth, measured my progress against their acceptance. But sitting in that chair, conducting that interview, I realized I'd never needed any of it, because the only validation that ever really mattered was my own. And I had earned it. Every late night, every missed nap, every time I bit my tongue while they laughed at my pain, it had all led here, to this chair, to this moment, to this power. Mine. Finally. The interview ended, but the silence afterward felt even louder. I didn't hear from Dylan for the rest of the day. No calls, no text, no sudden knocks on my bedroom door, just nothing. And that silence? It was heavier than any words he could have spoken, but it wasn't my burden to carry anymore. For once, he was the one left wondering what I was thinking, what I would say, what I would do next. The power shift was real now, not just in titles or roles, but in energy. For the first time since I came back home, I wasn't the one walking on eggshells. He was. 2 days later, a message came through from HR. Candidate Dylan Monroe, application closed, not proceeding. I had reviewed the notes, marked my recommendation, and made the decision. Professionally. Without bias. Dylan lacked the qualifications, the team spirit, and the maturity we needed at Solvex. And more importantly, he was still a man who underestimated women, even when they were sitting across the table with every ounce of authority he once mocked. That evening, we crossed paths in the hallway. I was carrying Leo's backpack from preschool, wearing my company hoodie, hair pulled into a bun. He stood at the end of the hall like he'd been waiting. His usual cocky posture was gone. He wasn't smirking or posturing, just quiet. "Hey," he said. I didn't answer right away. I adjusted Leo's backpack on my shoulder and waited. He started. "I didn't realize how much you've done. What you've built. That you're, legit." I looked at him, meeting his eyes. "You didn't ask." He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "Yeah, that's on me." Another pause. "I guess I thought I knew everything," he muttered, almost to himself. "But I didn't even know my own sister." That part hit, because it was true. "I spent a long time trying to prove myself to this family," I said, voice steady. "And all I got was silence or mockery. You laughed at my car, my struggle, my life. You treated me like I was dragging everyone down. You never once saw what I was building." He looked away, shame creeping up his neck. "I didn't know how to handle it. You changed. You got stronger." "No," I said. "I stopped needing your approval." His shoulders sank a little more. I could tell he wanted to say something deeper, something that maybe resembled an apology. But the words weren't fully formed yet, and I wasn't going to help him find them. This wasn't about closure. Not yet. Maybe not ever. This was about letting the weight fall where it belonged. He took a breath. "If there's ever anything I can do to make it up to you—" "There isn't," I said calmly. "But thanks." He nodded. It was awkward but honest. I turned to go, and Leo came toddling out of the kitchen, calling, "Mama!" I scooped him up with ease. He wrapped his arms around my neck like he always did, his warmth grounding me instantly. Dylan watched us for a second. Then he said, "You're a really good mom, Tessa." I paused. That I hadn't expected. "Thanks," I replied. And this time, I meant it. He stepped aside so I could pass, and I walked away. Slowly, not rushed, not running. Because I had nothing to prove. Let him sit with the realization. Let him finally understand what it feels like to be underestimated, to be left out of the loop, to be on the outside of something important. That was the consequence. Not public shame, not revenge, just reality. He now had to live with the knowledge that while he mocked me for standing still, I was quietly building an empire, that while he laughed, I rose, and now I wasn't behind. I was miles ahead. It's strange, the moment you realize you don't need to fight anymore. Not because the war is over, but because it's no longer yours to wage. After that hallway conversation with Dylan, I expected to feel something big. Triumph, validation, maybe even a little smug satisfaction. I thought I'd play it over in my head like a highlight reel, savoring the way his voice cracked, the guilt in his eyes, the way he finally saw me. But instead, I felt quiet, still, like something inside me had finally settled. For years, I thought victory would come with fireworks, a dramatic confrontation, an apology shouted across the dinner table, my family finally recognizing my worth. But the real win wasn't in their regret. It was in my release. I no longer needed Dylan to apologize. I didn't need my parents to suddenly change, or my mother to hug me and whisper that she was proud. I didn't need their understanding, because I understood myself. That was the victory. It was in waking up every morning and knowing I could take care of my son, that I had built a life from scraps, that I had risen, not despite the silence around me, but because of it. There was a time when I measured my worth in comparison to theirs. Dylan had the job, the car, the support. I had nothing but diapers, rejection letters, and exhaustion. I'd sit at the kitchen table filling out job applications while they talked about brunch plans and bonus checks. I felt like I was a ghost in my own life, but not anymore. Now, I woke up to a home I paid for. Leo had his own room, his own toys, a bookshelf I filled with bedtime stories I never got tired of reading. My calendar was full of meetings I led, not interviews I begged for. My inbox didn't give me anxiety. It gave me direction. And most importantly, my heart wasn't heavy. I had forgiven myself for the bad marriage, for staying too long, for coming back home thinking it would be safe. I had let go of the need to prove anything. The truth is, you don't climb out of darkness for applause. You climb because you refuse to live there. One night, I sat on the couch with Leo curled beside me, watching cartoons. He reached over, rested his tiny hand on mine, and said, "You always come back for me." I turned to him, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "When you go to work," he said simply, "you always come back." I smiled. "Of course I do." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his show, but my eyes stayed on him. He didn't know it, but that one line said everything. I had never abandoned him. Even when I was drowning, even when I felt like the world had left me behind, I never stopped showing up. And that's what real strength looks like. Showing up. Every day. Without applause. Without recognition. Without anyone even noticing. I had done that. And now I no longer lived in reaction to pain. I lived in response to purpose. That was my inner victory, not the job title, not the paycheck, not the moment I watched my brother squirm, but the peace that filled my chest every time I looked at the life I had created. A peaceful life, a powerful one. And when I walked through the doors of my office or held Leo's hand on the way to school or cooked dinner in my own kitchen with music playing in the background, I didn't feel like someone who had something to prove. I felt like someone who had finally come home, not to a place, but to herself. I had become the woman they never saw coming. And I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, fully, freely, and finally on my own terms. A few weeks had passed since the interview. Life had settled into a new kind of rhythm. Morning drop-offs, back-to-back meetings, frozen waffles for dinner when I was too tired to cook. It was the kind of busy that came from purpose, not panic. And I was okay with that. The dust had long settled on what happened with Dylan. He never brought it up again, and I didn't need him to. He'd gotten the message, not just through the rejection email, but through everything I didn't say. But closure is funny. Sometimes it doesn't arrive when you expect it. Sometimes it shows up quietly, like a knock on the door in the middle of an ordinary day. And that's exactly how it came. It was a Sunday morning. Leo and I were making pancakes in the kitchen of our new apartment. A small 2-bedroom on the edge of town with creaky floors and sunlight that spilled through the windows like a promise. We had moved out a month earlier. My name was on the lease. My name was on everything now. Leo stood on a little step stool, stirring the batter with too much enthusiasm. There was more mix on the counter than in the bowl, but I didn't care. He was laughing. That's what mattered. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find Dylan standing there, hands in his pockets, looking unsure. Not like the smug, overconfident version of himself I had grown up with. This was someone else, someone searching for the right words. "Hey," he said. "Sorry to drop by." I blinked. "How did you even know where Mom mentioned you moved. I asked her for the address." I hesitated, then opened the door a little wider. "You want to come in?" He nodded, stepping inside. He looked around slowly, taking in the modest furniture, the framed photo of Leo and me on the wall, the stack of business books on the coffee table. "It's nice," he said. It's ours, I replied simply. He looked toward the kitchen and spotted Leo, who waved enthusiastically. Hi, Uncle Dylan, Dylan waved back, smiling. Hey, kiddo. I led him to the couch and offered coffee, which he declined. He seemed nervous, which caught me off guard. Dylan never did nervous, but this version of him was quieter. Humbled, maybe. I just wanted to say, he began, I was out of line, not just at dinner, not just with the jokes, but for years. I waited. I didn't get it, he said. I thought I was the one doing everything right. Good job. Good image. But watching you at that interview, it kind of hit me. He looked up, eyes more honest than I'd ever seen them. You're the strongest person I know, Tessa. You didn't just get through it. You rebuilt yourself, and I was too wrapped up in my own world to see it. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't poetic, but it was real. I nodded slowly. I don't need an apology, Dylan. I needed respect, and I needed space to become who I was always capable of being. He looked down, nodding. I get that. I really do. There was a long pause before he spoke again. I know I lost your trust, and I probably don't deserve to get it back. But if there's ever a way to earn it, I'm willing to try. I didn't say anything right away. I didn't rush to forgive or hug or tie a pretty bow on our story. But I appreciated his effort. Growth doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it's a man sitting on a couch, finally realizing he's not the center of the universe. Leo came over then, pancake batter on his cheek, and climbed into my lap. Uncle Dylan's staying for breakfast? He asked hopefully. I looked at Dylan. He looked at me. If that's okay, he said. I nodded. Sure. We sat at the kitchen table together for the first time in what felt like years. Not in our parents' house, not with judgment in the air, but in my home, my space, my rules. It wasn't a full circle moment. Not yet, but it was a start. And sometimes, that's enough. The next Monday morning, I stood in my kitchen, coffee in one hand, Leo's lunchbox in the other, watching the sunrise paint soft streaks of orange and pink across the walls. It was quiet. Not the heavy, lonely kind of quiet I used to dread. The kind that made me feel forgotten. This was the kind of quiet that meant peace, control, freedom. I glanced over at Leo, who was sitting at the table swinging his legs and nibbling on toast. His face was messy with jelly, his hair stuck up in every direction. And he was perfect. Ready for school, buddy? I asked. He gave me a thumbs-up, mouth full of toast. I'm bringing my rainbow dinosaur today. Of course you are. He grinned. We had 10 minutes before we needed to head out, but I wasn't rushing anymore. I didn't live in panic mode now. We had time. I had time. As I moved through our little apartment, the one I paid for, furnished, and made into a home, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Rooted. I wasn't floating anymore, or waiting for someone to save me, or explaining myself to people who never listened. This life? I built it, brick by brick. One sleepless night at a time, one application at a time, one breathless moment of holding it together when everything around me wanted me to fall apart. I thought back to that girl in the guest room, the one crying silently at night while rocking a newborn, the one who didn't even believe she had a future, let alone one worth fighting for. She was exhausted, terrified, and convinced she was nothing but a cautionary tale, but she kept going. She took every insult, every rejection, every laugh behind her back and used it as fuel. She didn't scream or slam doors. She studied, she grew, she endured. And now she's me, a director at a growing tech company, a single mother raising a beautiful, kind-hearted boy, a woman who no longer looks at her reflection with shame. The revenge people think they want. Dramatic takedowns, public wins, explosive, I told you so moments. I didn't need any of that. The real win was waking up in a home I created, driving a car I bought, walking into meetings with a clear voice and a sharp mind. The win was Leo clapping when I told him about a new project I landed. The way he calls me boss mom and draws pictures of us standing under the words, "My mom is strong." The win was peace. Dylan had started texting occasionally. Nothing deep. Mostly check-ins, a funny meme here or there. I didn't know where that road would lead, and I wasn't in a rush to find out. I had learned not everything needed to be resolved to be okay. Some relationships could grow again, and some were better left in the past. But I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was done carrying all that weight. Forgiveness wasn't something I handed out like a trophy. It was something I gave myself so I could finally move forward without dragging my history behind me like chains. I loaded Leo into the backseat of our car. Not my old rusted Corolla, but a reliable SUV I bought outright last month. He buckled himself in like a little grown-up, holding his rainbow dinosaur proudly in his lap. On the way to school, he asked, "Can I work at your company one day?" I smiled. "Only if you're okay with your mom being the boss." He laughed. "You're already the boss." And he was right. Not just at work, in life, in my own story. For years, I let other people narrate who I was. Broken, struggling, too emotional, too much. But not anymore. Now, I tell my own story, and it's not just about survival. It's about rising, thriving, living on my own terms. So to the girl sitting in silence while the world mocked her, I see you. I honor you. You didn't give up. You became everything they said you couldn't. And you did it without asking anyone's permission.